learned is to listen more than you speak. It's amazing what foundations you can lay if you just give people the space to fill the silence with their own fears, their own hopes, their own mundane little secrets. Here in Maple Creek, there was a lot of silence to fill. From the outside, my life was an open book, its pages smelling of cinnamon and melting sugar. I was Valencia. I ran the little bakery on Main Street. I was the one who organized the town potluck, remembered everyone's birthday, and always had a warm loaf of sourdough for the new family down the block. I knew Mrs. Gable's arthritis flared up in the rain, that young Timmy was deathly allergic to peanuts, and that the sheriff took his coffee with 2 creams because his wife was nagging him about his weight. They saw a friendly, slightly lonely woman who found purpose in caring for others. I encouraged this. I cultivated it. I listened to their fears about the mortgage, their grief over a lost pet, their secret little hopes for their children. My empathy was a finely tuned instrument, and I played it perfectly. They trusted me. They loved me. It was the most important part of the project. This whole town, this perfect, trusting, isolated little community, was the culmination of my life's work. The Founders Day picnic I was planning, it was going to be an event that would change everything. Everyone was invited. But when I locked the bakery door at night and walked home under the fat, silent moon, the performance ended. The muscles in my face relaxed from the strain of holding a constant, gentle smile. The warmth drained away, and the cold, quiet truth of my purpose settled in. I am a farmer. These people are my crop, and the responsibility I carry isn't mine alone. It's the memory of a home that was lost to silence and dust. I don't just see the sunset. I see the colors of a sky that burned with strange energies and then faded forever. I don't just feel the breeze, I feel the memory of gray grit on the wind, a fine silt of decay that choked everything and everyone. I carry the silence of all my people in my bones. The imperative that brought me here was not a choice. It was a promise made to the dying. A command echoing across a vast emptiness. Build something new. Make us whole again. Gather what we need to survive. Sometimes a sliver of fear, sharp and unwanted, pierces my resolve. It happens when a child's small hand wraps around my finger, or when the sheriff gives me a genuine, tired smile that reaches his eyes. A flicker of warmth. An echo of the emotions I so skillfully simulate. This is the project's greatest vulnerability. Getting too close to the subjects, developing a genuine attachment, could compromise everything. It's a weakness that could condemn my people to the silence I carry within me. They are not my friends. They are not my neighbors. They are the future. And I have to keep reminding myself of that, right up until the very end. The first crack in my perfect little world had a name, Mr. Lamb. He lived in the house at the end of the cul-de-sac, a null space in my carefully woven tapestry of community data. The townfolk dismissed him as a paranoid recluse who ordered his groceries online and hadn't been seen at a town event in years. I saw him as a dangerous and unmonitored variable. One morning, he was there in the bakery, his eyes dark and intense, scanning the room as if looking for exits. He didn't hold the placid trust I was used to. "You're new," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the cheerful morning chatter. "I've been here almost a year," I replied with my warmest, most disarming smile. "I'm Valencia." He just stared, his gaze analytical, dismissive of the performance. "I've been here 30 years, he said quietly. "I notice things. Your garden, the nightshades you have planted by your back fence. They bloom out of season, only at night. He bought a single black coffee and left, and the cheerful bell on the door sounded like an alarm. He was observing. He was a researcher in his own right, and his subject was me. This was an unacceptable risk. The next morning, I found it on my front doorstep, a 5-pointed star drawn in coarse salt, encircling a dead crow, its wings spread as if in a final, frantic plea. It was a symbol, a message, an accusation. I felt a surge of cold, clarifying focus. A researcher doesn't tolerate contamination of the experiment. I swept the salt in the bird into a dustpan, my movements calm and efficient, and disposed of it in the trash 2 towns over. But all day, I felt his eyes on me. A glint of light from his attic window. A telescope. Not pointed at the stars, but at my house. My smile for my customers never wavered, but inside, the cold imperative was sharpening. The variable had to be eliminated before it could corrupt the dataset. That evening, I baked a fresh apple pie, the scent of cinnamon and caramelized sugar, a perfect olfactory camouflage for my intent. I walked the short distance to his house as dusk settled, the sky a beautiful, bruised purple. This was the point of no return. The threat to the project had to be neutralized. He let me in without a word, his face a mask of suspicion. His house wasn't a home, it was a command center. The walls were plastered with celestial charts, complex radio telemetry readouts, and printouts of atmospheric data. And photos. Dozens of long-lens photos of me. Working in my garden, unlocking the bakery, talking to the sheriff on the street. In the center of it all, a massive, wall-sized astrophotograph of the Andromeda Galaxy with certain star systems circled in red ink. He saw me looking at it. His voice was a reedy whisper filled with a terrible, vindicated certainty. It's a countdown, isn't it? The signals. Faint, structured pulses from that system. They've been getting stronger all year. They end today. The day of your Founders' Day picnic. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and triumph. You're a shepherd, getting the flock ready for the slaughter. The man's paranoia had, through sheer impossible chance, brushed against the truth. It was a statistical impossibility. A shame. My practiced gentle smile remained fixed in place. Mr. Lamb, I began, my voice a symphony of neighborly concern. That's wild accusation. This has been a stressful time for everyone. Are you feeling all right? He didn't react to the manipulation. His eyes were locked on mine, searching for the lie. I know what you are, he insisted, fumbling for the phone on his desk. He couldn't be allowed to sow chaos, to panic the subjects. The entire project, the survival of my people, hung in the balance. I didn't rush. The space between us seemed to fold. One moment, he was 10 feet away, fumbling with the phone. The next, I was there. He gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief, not just at my impossible speed, but at the flicker in my hand, a momentary distortion of light and form as my biology forgot its human mask. He didn't have time to scream. My hand closed around his throat. It was not an act of anger, but of simple, regrettable necessity, like pruning a diseased branch to save the tree. The snap of his neck was a quiet, efficient sound. I landed him gently on the floor beside his desk. The variable was eliminated. I took the pie with me when I left. Ways not, want not. The Founders' Day picnic was perfect. The sun was warm, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. I moved through the crowd of happy, laughing people, the architect of this beautiful, fleeting moment. Every smile, every hug, every shared slice of my pie was a successful data point. Trust, optimal. Contentment, peak. The subjects were calm, happy, and gathered, ready. As dusk fell and the first stars appeared, I stepped up to the smallest stage in the center of the park and tapped the microphone. The cheerful chatter died down. Everyone turned to me, their faces open and smiling, full of the trust I had so meticulously cultivated. I looked out to them, the sheriff, the Gables, young Timmy, chasing a firefly, his mother watching with a loving smile. A year of work? A flicker of that dangerous warmth sparked within me, a momentary catastrophic system error. I crushed it. I thought of the gray dust and the eternal silence of my home. My smile vanished. My face became a blank canvas. The performance was over. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice now stripped of all warmth, all emotion. It was a flat clinical instrument. "It's been an honor getting to know you. You have been a truly exceptional crop." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "I'd like to thank you for your contribution to a vital cause. You are the main course." For a second, there was only baffled silence. Then a few nervous laughs. But they died as they saw my face. They died as the sky went dark. It wasn't a cloud. It was a presence, a vast, silent, organic-looking thing that blotted out the stars. It had no lights, no engines, only a profound and terrifying silence. Then the beams came down, shimmering, translucent columns of energy that hummed with a low, resonant frequency. The panic was instantaneous and total. A beam touched the sheriff. He didn't scream for long. He was deconstructed, dissolving into a shimmering cloud of individual atoms, a human-shaped nebula of particles that was drawn silently, inexorably up into the ship. The process was terrifyingly clean, efficient. The air filled with the screens of the harvested. The beams moved with an agricultural precision, sweeping through the playground, turning children's laughter into glittering dust motes. I saw Timothy. His face was a mask of terror. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought of the peanut-free cookie I had baked especially for him. Then a beam found him, and he was gone. It was processing. A disassembly. The terror of it was absolute because it was so utterly indifferent. The horror of the abattoir. And I, their friend, their neighbor, stood and watched it all. I was the farmer, watching the fruits of my labor being collected. In minutes, it was over. The colossal shape above faded into a dimension I could perceive but not enter. Silence returned. The park was empty, full of ghosts. Half-eaten plates of potato salad, a child's shoe lying on the grass, a gently swaying swing. The entire town, gone. My work here was done. The mission was a success. The gathered resources would sustain my people for another cycle. I walked home through the empty streets. The silence here was different from the silence of my home. This was a temporary, hollow quiet. My home's silence was eternal. My bags were already packed. I took one last look around the sterile house that had been my stage for a year. I felt a faint, weary satisfaction. A job well done. I got in my car, the engine obscenely loud in the profound silence of Maple Creek. As I drove away, I didn't look back. The trauma I carry isn't the memory of what I did here, it's the memory of why I had to do it. The silence of this town is the price for breaking the silence of my homeworld. A fair trade by any logical metric. Out on the highway, the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For me, it was just the start of a long drive. I had a map in the passenger seat with a new state, a new town, circled in red. A place called Harmony Gulch. According to my research, it was picturesque, isolated, and tight-knit. A place where a friendly new neighbor who loved to bake would be welcomed with open arms. I turned up the radio, a meaningless stream of human music, and settled in for the journey. After all, the harvest was plentiful, but my beings were so very, very hungry.
My name is Gabby, and my world is about 400 square feet of beige carpet and white walls. It's not much, but it's quiet. From my desk, I can see the single window that looks out onto a brick wall. Perfect. No people, no surprises, no chaotic variables. I work from home, of course. I'm a data analyst for a company I've never seen, interacting with coworkers I only know by their email addresses. It's a clean, sterile existence, a meticulously constructed quarantine zone, and I've built it that way on purpose. Most people my age are out there, living, building careers, falling in love, making friends. I'm building firewalls, not for my computer, but for my head. My life is a collection of routines designed to keep everyone and everything at arm's length. Groceries are delivered, packages are left at the door. The highlight of my week is a new herbal tea arriving in the mail. Its scent of chamomile and lavender, a soft, muted yellow in an otherwise colorless world. It sounds pathetic, I know, but for me, loneliness is the only thing that keeps me safe. Or sane. I'm not sure which anymore. All this work, all this isolation, it's all for one thing: to save enough money to get away. Not just from the city, but from the monster that lives behind my eyes. I've spent years researching fringe scientists, forgotten folklore, and dusty medical journals from the turn of the century. I think I finally found someone. A specialist in parapsychological phenomena in a quiet corner of Vermont who might be able to help, who might be able to offer a cure. That's the goal, the only goal, to finally be alone in my own head. It started when I was 6. Just flashes at first. A bloody knee on the playground a second before my friend Tommy tripped and skinned it. A shattered glass on the kitchen floor moments before my mom dropped it. My parents called it a vivid imagination. Then the flashes got worse. They became stories, little horror movies playing without my permission, projected onto the back of my eyelids. I'd see a neighbor I waved to every morning, and suddenly I'd be watching him slump over his steering wheel in a traffic jam, chest tight, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The worst part wasn't just seeing it. It was feeling it. I'd feel the sudden crushing panic, the radiating pain in his left arm, the dizzying fade to black. I don't just see how people die, I get the encore performance of their final terrifying moments, the echo of their soul's departure. You can't build a life on that. You can't hold someone's hand knowing you might suddenly see it mangled in a car wreck. You can't look into someone's eyes and fall in love when you might, at any moment, see the light go out of them for good. Every potential friend is a ticking time bomb, a future tragedy I'm forced to preview. So I chose silence. I chose solitude. This curse, this ghost in my head, thrives on connection. It takes the one thing I, as a deeply empathetic person, want most and turns it into a weapon against me. But I can't accept that. I won't. I've been a prisoner for 21 years. It's time to find the key. It has to be. Because I don't know how much longer I can survive the ending of every story.
My fortress was breached on a Tuesday. It started with the sound I hadn't heard in years, a friendly, confident knock on my door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, percussive terror. I froze, staring at the peephole as if it were the eye of a predator. On the other side was a man with kind eyes and a crooked smile, holding a ridiculously oversized cactus. He introduced himself through the door. His name was Alex, his new next-door neighbor. He'd gotten a package of mine by mistake. For a week, I managed to avoid him, my movements timed his comings and goings, a silent, paranoid dance in the hallway. But he was persistent in a gentle way I wasn't prepared for, a cheerful morning in the hall that I'd pretend not to hear. The rich, warm scent of freshly brewed coffee from his apartment filling the corridor, a smell that was a comforting deep brown. He was a crock of sunlight under my door, and the dread was suffocating. I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of the hope he represented, the warmth I craved and knew I couldn't have. The dam finally broke over a dropped bag of groceries. I was fumbling with my keys, my arms overloaded, when the thin paper bag tore, sending a cascade of oranges rolling across the drab hallway carpet. Before I could protest, he was there, his door swinging open, laughing softly as he helped me gather them. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said, his smile genuine and disarming. We talked for just a minute. He was a graphic diviner, loved old movies, and had a terrible track record with houseplants, hence the ridiculously resilient cactus. It was so normal it hurt. Then, as he handed me the last orange, his fingers brushed against mine, and the world ended. It wasn't a flash this time, it was an immersion. The smell of rain-slicked asphalt and gasoline filled my lungs. The sound of screeching tires and shattering glass exploded in my ears, so loud it felt like my skull would crack. I saw the world through his eyes, spinning violently as the car tumbled, the dashboard rushing up to meet his face with a sickening crunch of bone and metal. I felt the sharp, blinding pain in his chest as the steering column broke his ribs, the hot, wet sensation of blood filling his mouth, the final panic thought of a promise he couldn't keep to someone named Sarah. Then darkness. I gasped, snatching my hand back as if I'd been burned. I was back in the hallway, the smell of oranges and dust replacing the gasoline. Alex was looking at me, his smile fading into concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just stared at his kind, oblivious face, the face I had just seen destroyed, and shoved the rest of the groceries into my apartment, slamming and locking the door without a word.
For an hour, I slid down the back of my door, my body trembling, trying to scrub the vision from my mind. Part of me screamed to deny it. It was a mistake, a misfire, just my curse being cruel for the sake of cruelty. But I knew better. I'd never been wrong before. This was his future, a short, brutal, and unavoidable one. I was staring at two impossible choices. Let this kind man walk unknowingly to his death, or try to save him and be labeled a lunatic, shattering the fragile, anonymous peace I'd built. The denial crumbled, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I couldn't just do nothing. This was the final push.
I stumbled to my laptop, my hands still shaking, and pulled up the email for the specialist, the one I'd been too afraid to contact. As my fingers hovered over the keyboard, the air in my apartment dropped. A deep, unnatural cold seeped into the room, raising goosebumps on my arms. The low hum of my computer speakers warped into a whispering static, like a voice trying to form words just at the edge of my hearing. Then, in the reflection on the dark screen, I saw it. Just for a second, a tall, distorted shadow standing behind me where nothing should be. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was tall, thin, and it felt pleased. It was then that I understood, with a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. The thing in my head wasn't just a part of me. It wasn't a faulty circuit. It was a passenger, and it was hungry. The email to the specialist remained a blinking cursor in a blank draft. What could I even say? Dear Dr. Alistair, I think a ghost lives in my head and it's feeding on my despair. Also, my new neighbor is going to die. I'd be dismissed as a prank or worse, a case for psychiatric intervention. The vision of Alex, the feeling of the shadow, they were connected. The answers weren't in some distant academic's inbox. They were buried in the one place I had spent my entire adult life avoiding. My childhood home. The idea settled in my stomach like a block of ice. I had always blamed my condition on a faulty wire in my brain, a repressed trauma I couldn't access. But if I was truly honest with myself, the strange cold, the whispering static, the feeling of being watched, it had all been stronger there, in that house, with my mother.
The drive back was a journey through a decaying photograph. The town looked the same, just sadder. My mother's house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a cluttered, oppressive two-story filled with secrets. She greeted me with the same detached surprise she always did. Her home smelled of dust and dried herbs, a cloying scent that clung to the back of my throat. I told her everything. About the visions, about Alex, about the shadow. I needed to know what happened to me when I was a kid. She listened with a placid, unnerving calm. "Grabiella," she said, her voice smooth as riverstone. "Your imagination has always been your greatest affliction. You've built a prison for yourself, and now you're hallucinating inmates." Her denial was too quick, too polished. "The attic," I said, my voice firm. "I want to go in the attic." Her face changed, a flash of cold, raw panic. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "It's not safe." Her fear was the confirmation I needed. I pushed past her. She grabbed my arm. "I forbid it, Gabriella." The fight was on, a clumsy, desperate struggle. I yanked the cord and the old wooden ladder groaned down, releasing a puff of ancient, stale air. The attic was a tomb, suffocatingly hot, smelling of brittle paper and dead things. "There's nothing for you here," my mother shrieked from the bottom of the ladder. The whispering static was back, louder now. A chorus of hushed, sibilant voices slithering in my ears. The air grew colder. I started tearing into boxes, old clothes, moth-eaten blankets. Then I saw it. Tucked away under old curtains was a heavy, dark wood trunk. It was locked. "That's just old linens," she yelled, starting to climb the ladder. I found a broken metal rod and jammed it into the lock. I twisted and pulled until with a loud crack, the latch gave way. I threw open the lid. On top lay a small, ornate wooden box. Inside, nestled on faded black velvet,
were things that made no sense. A small, wickedly sharp silver knife, a bundle of dried blackish herbs, and a photograph. A faded Polaroid of a little girl with wide, terrified eyes sitting cross-legged in the center of a complex chalk circle on the floor. The little girl was me. My breath hitched. My world tilted. Beneath the photo was a book, bound in cracked, dark leather. I opened it. The pages were filled with my mother's elegant, spidery handwriting in a language I didn't recognize. There were diagrams, constellations, and complex overlapping circles, just like the one in the photograph. Then I saw it. A page with a diagram that was sickeningly familiar. A human silhouette. And hovering right behind it, a tall, thin, distorted shadow. My name, Gabriella, was written over and over in the margins. The static in my ears resolved into a single, triumphant whisper, a voice that was not my own, but was coming from inside my head. Oracle. I looked up from the page and met my mother's eyes as she reached the top of the attic. All the panic was gone from her face, replaced with a look of cold, terrifying pride. "It wasn't a curse, Gabriella," she said, her voice dripping with a reverence that made my blood run cold. "It was an attunement, a gift. I bound a sorrowful seer to you, a guide to the final moments. I made you a sacred vessel, an oracle of Mortis." She took a step closer, her hand outstretched. "I made you powerful." The horror was absolute. It wasn't an illness. It wasn't trauma. It was a sacrifice. My mother had taken my life, my mind, my hope for connection, and offered it all up to some dark, unknowable thing for power. The passenger in my head wasn't an intruder. It had been invited in. My greatest fear, that my curse was a barrier to connection, was a lie. The ultimate connection, the one between a mother and child, was the very thing that had damned me.
I don't remember leaving the house. I remember the sensation of the world being made of glass, and I was the only thing that was real. The drive back to my apartment was silent, but my head was screaming. The passenger was no longer hiding. It was present, a constant cold spot in my soul. A hum of static beneath my thoughts. The horror of what my mother had done was so vast, so monstrous, that it broke something inside me. The part that hoped, the part that fought, the part that believed I could ever be free. I was 7 years old again, sitting terrified in a chalk circle while my own mother chanted in a language I couldn't understand, welcoming a monster into my eyes. My life hadn't been a struggle against a curse. It had been the slow, agonizing fulfillment of a ritual. My defining trauma was never about seeing death. It was about the helplessness that came with it. The absolute, soul-crushing inability to stop the inevitable, to save the people I might have cared for. Now I understand. That helplessness wasn't a side effect of the curse, it was the entire point. The sorrowful seer, my eternal passenger, doesn't just show me death. It feeds on the despair that knowledge creates. It savors the exquisite agony of a gentle, empathetic soul being forced to watch the brutal end of a life it cannot save.
My mother didn't just give me a ghost, she turned my own empathy into its personal banquet. I am back in my 400 square foot world, but it's no longer a fortress. It's an altar. The beige carpet and white walls are the pristine, sterile backdrop for the horror show that is now my existence. The silence is gone, replaced forever by the low, whispering static, the overture for the next vision. The escape I had been saving for, the cure I had been dreaming of, they all evaporated into nothing. There was no cure for this. There was no escape. This was not my fate. This was my purpose. I think of Alex, his kind eyes and crooked smile. The vision of his death plays in my mind, not as a flash, but on a constant, torturous loop. The screeching tires, the shattering glass, the final panicked thought. I see it, I feel it, I know the day, the time, the street corner. And I know I will do nothing, because that is my function now. I am not Gabby, the data analyst who dreams of a quiet life. I am the Oracle of Mortis. I am the silent, helpless witness. The ghost in my head has what it wants, and it is always, always hungry.
My whole life has been a performance. I don't mean that in a dramatic, all the world's a stage kind of way. It's more literal for me. Every morning, I wake up and put on a costume. Not clothes, but a personality. I practice smiles in the mirror, rehearse small talk in the shower, and study the way people's eyes crinkle when they laugh at a joke. I have notebooks filled with observations. Maintain eye contact for 3 to 5 seconds. Nod to show you're listening. Offer a compliment about their shoes if conversation stalls. It's exhausting, this constant act of trying to be normal, of trying to mimic the effortless way other people just are. You see, my brain is wired differently. It's a machine built for patterns, for systems, for the beautiful, logical dance of data. I can see the architecture in a line of code, the hidden rhythm in a chaotic city street, the mathematical certainty in a flock of birds turning in perfect unison. But I can't see the simple things, the things everyone else seems to be born knowing. I don't understand the invisible threads that connect people, the unspoken rules of friendship, the subtle shift in tone that means I'm joking instead of I'm angry. To me, the social world is a foreign language, spoken in whispers, and I'm just a tourist fumbling with a phrase book, always a step behind, always getting it wrong. This isn't just a quirk. It's not some charming eccentricity. It's a fundamental flaw, a crack in my foundation that I've been trying to patch over my entire life. The shame of it is a physical weight, something that settles in my chest and makes it hard to breathe. It started young, as these things often do. I remember one afternoon in 3rd grade, during recess. A girl named Sarah was showing everyone a drawing she had made of her family. It was a typical kid's drawing, stick figures with big round heads and scribbled hair. Everyone was cooing over it, saying how lovely it was. I was just looking at it, really looking at it. I noticed the way she'd drawn her little brother shorter than the family dog. I saw that she'd colored her mom's hair yellow, even though her mom was a brunette. My brain, the pattern-seeking machine, just saw the inconsistencies. Without meaning to be cruel, I pointed them out. That's not right. Your brother is taller than your dog, and your mom's hair is brown." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face crumpled, her drawing crushed in her small fist as she ran away crying. The other kids stared at me, their eyes wide with a kind of horrified pity. In that moment, I learned that honesty, my honesty, was a weapon. I learned that the way I saw the world was not just different, but wrong, defective. That day, I stopped trusting my own instincts. I started building my costume, piece by painful piece. My life's work, my obsession, is finding a cure for this. Not for them, but for me. I became a neuroscientist, diving into the labyrinth of the human mind, searching for the switch that would make me like everyone else. I'm chasing a miracle, a way to rewrite my own faulty code, to finally shed this skin and just be. My research led me to the fringe, to the dusty corners of science where theories get weird and funding gets scarce. I started studying consciousness itself, not just the mechanics of the brain, but the nature of being. I became obsessed with the concept of shared consciousness, of pure, unfiltered connection. The idea was intoxicating. Imagine, for a moment, not having to guess what someone is feeling. Imagine knowing instantly and completely. No more misinterpretations, no more awkward silences, no more fumbling for the right words. Just perfect, absolute understanding. It was everything I had ever wanted. I called my theoretical model the static. A state of pure, unified being. It was a beautiful concept. A sea of thought where every drop was connected to the whole. In my papers, I wrote about it as the next stage of evolution, a transcendence of the clumsy, isolated self. But in the quiet of my lab late at night, staring at the faint, shimmering noise on a disconnected monitor, a different word would sometimes flicker in my mind. Not transcendence, erasure. It was a terrifying thought, the idea that in becoming one with everything, you might cease to be anything at all. A promise of ultimate connection that felt, in its own way, like the ultimate prison. A perfect, silent, eternal state of non-being. It was the cure I was desperate for, and the one thing I feared more than anything else.
The incident in the lab changed things. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by a person, but by a concept. It was a strange, pervasive paranoia that followed me home, that lingered in the corners of my small apartment. I started seeing it in the periphery, a faint shimmer in my reflection in the subway window, a momentary haze over the faces of people in old photographs. It was like the world had a loose connection, constantly threatening to dissolve into static. I tried to focus on my work, to find a logical explanation, but the fear was a constant distraction. The unease was a low hum beneath the surface of my days, a constant reminder of that blank, empty face in the monitor. I stopped running the simulations. I felt like a man who had knocked on the door of a haunted house and was now terrified that something had followed him home. The dread was a slow poison, seeping into every part of my life, isolating me even more than my own nature already did. I was afraid to be alone, but I was even more afraid to be with people. How could I explain that I was being haunted by a theoretical state of being? How could I describe the chilling emptiness of that reflected face? They would think I was crazy. Maybe I was. The thought was a cold comfort, somehow less terrifying than the alternative, that the static was real and that it was aware of me, that it had seen my desperate desire to be normal, to connect, and it answered. In a moment of pure, unadulterated desperation, I turned to the one place my academic mind scorned, the dark corners of the internet. On a clandestine forum, buried under layers of encryption, I found them. People like me, in a way. People who felt broken, who were looking for a fix. They spoke in code about a miracle pill, a nootropic cocktail that promised to optimize social pathways. It was snake oil, I knew it. A dangerous, unregulated concoction sold to the desperate. But the testimonials were like a siren song. I can finally hold a conversation. My anxiety is gone. I feel normal. I ordered a single vial, my trembling fingers typing in the details for a cryptocurrency transfer. It arrived a week later in a plain, padded envelope containing a small, unlabeled bottle filled with a dozen chalky white pills. I held one on my palm, a tiny key that might unlock the life I'd always dreamed of, or a poison that would destroy what little I had. I swallowed it with a glass of water, the bitterness of it clinging to my tongue. The first day was miraculous. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic change. It was a quiet unfolding. I went to the coffee shop I visit every morning. Usually, the interaction is a minefield. I rehearse my order. I force a smile. I try to make the right amount of eye contact with the barista. It's a 5-minute ordeal that leaves me drained. But that morning, it was different. The words just came. "Morning, Anna. Just the usual, please. How's your daughter's science fair project coming along?" I remembered her name. I remembered she had a daughter. I remembered she had mentioned a science fair a week ago. The information was just there, accessible, not locked away behind a wall of social anxiety. Her face lit up. We had a genuine 2-minute conversation. It was effortless. It was glorious. For the first time in my 32 years, I felt like I was speaking the same language as everyone else. The world, which had always felt like a complex, unreadable text, was suddenly clear. I could see the subtle cues, the flicker of emotion in someone's eyes, the slight hesitation in their voice that spoke volumes. The constant grinding effort of performance was gone, replaced by an intuitive grace. I walked through the city that afternoon, not as a tourist, but as a native. I was one of them. I was normal. I was fixed. I wept that night, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The shame, that heavy cloak I'd worn since childhood, was finally gone. I felt light. I felt whole. I took another pill the next morning, eager for more of this beautiful, simple peace. The first crack in my new, perfect world appeared on the third day. It happened at the grocery store, a mundane place for a profound horror. I was standing in the checkout line, enjoying the simple rhythm of it all, when I felt a sudden, sharp spike of something that wasn't mine. It was a wave of cold, greasy panic, so intense that it made my stomach clench. I looked up, confused, my gaze landing on the man in front of me. He was a middle-aged guy in a cheap suit, buying milk and a lottery ticket. He looked bored, tapping his foot impatiently, but that wasn't what I was feeling from him. Underneath the placid surface, a silent scream was echoing. I can't lose this job. I can't. She'll leave me. God, she'll take the kids. The thoughts weren't words. They were raw, visceral feelings flooding my mind like sewage. I could feel the sweat on his palms, the frantic thumping of his heart, the bitter taste of his desperation. I stumbled back, my own breath catching in my throat. I looked away, trying to break the connection, my eyes falling on the cashier. She was a young woman, maybe a college student, with a bored expression as she scanned the items. But what I felt from her was a deep, aching loneliness, a hollow sorrow that felt like a physical weight in my own chest. No one sees me. I'm invisible. I could feel the sting of her unshed tears, the cold emptiness of her apartment waiting for her. I slammed my basket onto the floor and fled, running out into the street, gasping for air. The world hadn't become clear. It had become transparent. The pill hadn't just taught me the language of social cues, it had plugged me directly into the source code of human suffering. I was no longer just an observer, I was a receiver, and the broadcast was a cacophony of endless pain.
My apartment, once my sanctuary, became a prison. I tried to rationalize it, to deny what was happening. It was just a side effect, a temporary hyperempathy that would fade. My scientific mind desperately sought a logical pattern, a way to control the influx. I went back to the forum, but the page was gone. The seller, the testimonials, all of it had vanished into the digital ether. I was alone with this. I tried to shield myself, locking my doors, drawing the blinds, putting on noise-canceling headphones. But the silence only made it worse. Without the distraction of the city's hum, the psychic noise became clearer, more distinct. I could feel the simmering resentment of my downstairs neighbor over a rent increase, the quiet grief of the old woman across the hall whose husband had died last year, the frantic, buzzing anxiety of a student in the building cramming for an exam. Their emotions bled through the walls, seeping into my mind, becoming my own. My carefully constructed self was dissolving, my own feelings lost in the tidal wave of others. Denial crumbled into terror. This wasn't a side effect. The pill wasn't a fix. It was an accelerator, a chemical key that had unlocked a door in my mind, and I had no idea how to close it. The point of no return came on a Tuesday during a torrential downpour. I'd run out of food and was forced to venture outside. The rain hammered against the concrete, a cold, sterile smell filling the air. I thought the storm might help, that the noise and chaos would drown out the inner voices. I was wrong. The rain only seemed to amplify it. I made it 2 blocks before I had to stop, leaning against the slick wall of a building, overwhelmed. The subway grate on the sidewalk was belching steam, and with it, I felt a surge of collective despair. It was the emotional residue of millions of people who had passed this spot, a tapestry of hurried stress, weary resignation, and fleeting moments of anger. The city wasn't just a collection of individuals anymore. It was a single, sprawling organism of consciousness, and I was a raw, exposed nerve ending within it. I looked up at the crowd of people hurrying past under their umbrellas. I no longer saw faces. I saw a shimmering, distorted haze hovering over them, a visual static that pulsed with their collective emotions. A man in a tailored coat brushed past me, and I was hit with a jolt of his smug satisfaction over recent promotion, so potent it made me nauseous. A woman rushing her child along radiated a fierce, protective love that was so intense it felt like a physical blow. It was too much. The beautiful, effortless connection I had craved was this, a horrifying, intimate violation. I was drowning in humanity. I stumbled through the streets, a ghost in my own city. I could feel everything. The low-grade hum of anxiety from the financial district, the pulsing, hopeful energy from the university campus, the deep, historical sorrow that seemed to emanate from the old cobblestone streets of the historic quarter. I could feel the loneliness of 1,000 apartment windows, the secret shame hidden behind 1,000,000 locked doors. The static was no longer just a theory or a peripheral shimmer. It was the very air I was breathing. It was a tangible presence, a vast interconnected web of every thought, every feeling, every secret pain of every person in the city, all at once. It was a single collective scream of consciousness that had no beginning or end. And the pill, the goddamned miracle pill, hadn't made me normal. It had turned me into a perfect antenna, tuning me into a frequency of universal suffering. I was no longer Rafa, the man who struggled with patterns and people. I was just a conduit,
a vessel for a pain that was not my own, but was now inescapably all I was. I found myself in an elevator, the sterile box lifting me silently upwards. I didn't know which building it was. I just knew I had to get away from the noise on the ground, seeking a quiet that I instinctively knew no longer existed.
The elevator doors opened onto a rooftop, and for a blessed second, there was a semblance of peace. The city was spread out below me, a breathtaking grid of light and shadow under the bruised purple of the evening sky. The rain had stopped, and the air was cold and clean, smelling of wet concrete and ozone. For a moment, I could almost believe I was alone, high above the chaos. But then it washed over me again, stronger than ever. Looking down, I didn't see buildings and cars. I saw a neural network, a living, breathing organism of interconnected despair. Each pinprick of light was a soul, and I could feel the frantic, buzzing energy of all of them at once. The collective hum was a physical pressure against my skull. The static was not just in the people, it was the city itself, a single seething entity of emotion. I sank to my knees on the gritty surface of the roof, clutching my head. This was the pure, unfiltered connection I had theorized about, the transcendence I had written papers on. It was hell, a hell of perfect, absolute understanding. I saw every hidden insecurity, every repressed fear, every secret act of cruelty, every quiet moment of heartbreak. The world was an open wound, and I was tasting the infection. In my agony, a desperate primal instinct took over. I tried to fight back. I tried to rebuild the walls, to find the old familiar patterns of my own mind. I tried to remember what it was like to be me. I desperately searched for the comfort of my own singular isolation. Please, I whispered to the empty air, the words torn from me by a sob. Let me be disabled again. Please let me be broken. I just want to be myself. I pleaded for the return of my flaws, for the protective shell of my autism, for the quiet, orderly solitude of the world I had spent my entire life trying to escape. My plea was a single dying note in an infinite symphony of pain. It was swallowed instantly by the all-encompassing roar of the static. There was no escape. There was no going back. In that final, horrifying moment on the edge of that skyscraper, a terrifying clarity washed over me. It was a perfect, cold, logical understanding, the kind my own brain would have appreciated. The pill hadn't made me better or more human. It had simply stripped away the filters, the necessary delusions that allow a person to exist as an individual. It had tuned me into the fundamental frequency of the universe, and that frequency was suffering. My trauma, my lifelong feeling of being defective and isolated, wasn't a flaw. It was a shield, a necessary barrier that kept the horrifying, crushing weight of everyone else's reality at bay. My desperate quest to be normal, to connect, was a suicidal urge to dissolve into the ocean of collective agony. The static was not a predator that hunted me. It was a natural state, a universal truth waiting for anyone foolish enough to open the door. I had willingly walked through it, seeking a cure, only to find that disease was existence itself. A single silent tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek. It was the last thing that felt truly my own. I looked down once last time, no longer seeing a city but a beautiful, terrible tapestry of merged consciousness. I was already a part of it. This was just the last step. I chose the ultimate silence over the cacophony. I chose submission. With a final quiet exhalation, I stepped off the ledge. The aftermath was silence. Not the peaceful, restorative silence I had craved, but a profound and absolute emptiness.
On the rooftop, the only sound was the wind whistling around the abandoned maintenance sheds. The city below continued its frantic, ceaseless hum, unaware of the single screaming voice that had just been extinguished. My death was not an escape, it was an absorption, a final, tragic act of surrender. I had spent my entire life performing normality, convinced that my own mind was a defective instrument. That core trauma, the belief that my very nature was a flaw to be corrected, became the fuel for my own destruction. In my desperate search for a key to unlock human connection, I had found a truth I was not equipped to handle. That to be truly connected is to be consumed by the totality of human experience, and that experience, at its core, is pain. I had begged to be a part of the whole, not understanding that the cost of entry was the self. In the end, I got what I wanted. I was no longer isolated. I was one with the ceaseless, silent scream of the world. I was, finally, perfectly, horrifyingly normal.
Thank you so much for watching or listening. Like and subscribe for more nightmares. Your support keeps the darkness from consuming this channel, so we can face the next terrifying story together. Don't be left in the dark.